This is known as the Jungle Country. They have a lot of mysterious beliefs and rituals, and they're descended from an ancient empire that dabbled in the magic arts. Welcome to Kaulia. Sup guys, welcome back to Nations of Minecraft. So, if the whole world were like a classroom, Kaulia would kind of be the quiet kid. Uh, People have mixed feelings about them and they're a little bit weird, but they might one day just kill everyone. And we'll explain why. So, Kaulia is located right in the center of the world, and yeah, generally it can be divided up into two regions because there's the National Jungle Territory, which is most of the territory, and then there's the autonomous princedom of Zwisto, which is where the majority of people actually live. A slight majority, but still a majority. So a lot of trains run through Kaulia, so a lot of people see the jungles when they go on the train. But aside from the train and the parts you can see from it, most people never go to the rest of Kaulia. It's kind of secluded and kind of tucked away in the dark, deep jungles. So the city of Kaulia is really cool. It's like because the jungle is sacred to them, they don't want to cut down any trees. So they built it kind of like in the trees like this. It's like a network of tree houses. So that's the capital city, but it's not the largest city. The largest city is the city of Zwisto, which is the capital of the princedom of Zwisto. And yeah, it's a really cool city. I went there once and it looks pretty, but they have a really dark secret. So yeah, that adds to the whole mixed feeling, sort of eerie nature of Kaulia. They also have the International Trade Center, which is the only reason most people would ever go to Kaulia, aside from, going through there on the train. And yeah, it's a really cool place. It wasn't built by them, but now it's just in their territory, but they let other people rent it. So yeah, this is one of their main sources of income. Their other main source of income comes from Zwisto, and they do enchanting. Most of the enchanting in the world is done in Kaulia. Just don't ask them how they get their experience. That's where the creepy part comes in. All right, but yeah, in they do their enchanting in this temple. This temple's where they get their experience, and in their defense, at least they don't sacrifice children anymore. So things are getting better, but it's some people don't really like them for that, especially their neighbor Genesis. We'll talk more about that later. Anyway, so this is a biome map. So most of it is jungle, of course, and there's this wet forest and there's this fir forest. In Zwisto is just like the non-jungle area. And the reason most people live in Zwisto is because the non-jungle area is the only part where you're allowed to build stuff. Since the jungle is sacred, you can't cut down wood in the jungle, so most of the development and buildings are in the non-jungle area. And we'll explain why it's like a semi-autonomous territory later in the history segment. So yeah, the jungle is beautiful and a bit creepy if you go into the darkest parts. Supposedly, if you go into the really rural areas, the natives will attack you, so that's why the government tells people not to really explore their jungles. So, yeah, but if you do get a chance, there's some really beautiful rivers to sail on, and those are fine. Those are mostly safe. Mostly. Yeah, so they're really, really nice pictures of the jungle. Anyway, this is kind of the river network. This is not included in the official big world map, but I thought it'd be better to add for this episode. The most important river is Schwanzial River. It's like the vital artery that sort of winds through the whole country, and a lot of people live along it. So yeah, this is a picture of Schwanzial River. It's a very important river, and a lot of the natives live along it. So this is a population map, and as you can see, a lot of the population lives along Schwanzial River, including the capital, and it even runs past the International Trading Center. So yeah, very important. And the biggest population center, though, is, of course, Zwisto, as we talked about before. And this is a temperature map. Most of Kaulia, except for Zwisto, is really hot, and Zwisto is just kind of pretty warm, but it's the jungle. It's like the hottest part of the world. It's also a very wet country. These were very easy maps to make. Most of it is very wet, and Zwisto is just kind of wet, but the jungle is the wettest part of the world. Now, this is a language map. The color of the language is almost the same as the color of the humidity. It's confusing. But no, this is a language map. Everyone speaks Kaulian, but that's not all there is to the story, and this is where things get really controversial. So, Kaulian is their language, but the ethnicity of most people is the Twilight ethnicity. The Twilight ethnicity, those are the people who are descended from the ancient Twilight Empire, which is the empire that used to own all of the jungle. So these are the jungle natives. These minorities over here are Sputians. That's what they're called. They're called Sputians. And a lot of the controversy stems from the fact that this area in Zwisto is very segregated. You can see there's straight lines. That's because they're fenced into a few ghettos, because the Kaulians have decided that they don't like the Sputians, so they tell them to just stay in these small communities. So yeah, in Zwisto, when I went there, I saw this big wall separating the Sputians from the Twilights. The Twilights are all non-sheep, and the Sputians are all sheep, so that's how you can tell them apart. If you see a sheep in Kaulia, most likely they're a Sputian, and you probably won't see any except in these Sputian ghettos. Now, it wasn't always like that. They used to get along for a brief period of time, but that all went south. We'll talk about that in the history segment. So their history all begins with the Twilight Empire, which, like I said, is the empire that used to rule all of the jungle. Now, the natives of Twilight are actually from a different dimension. They're from the Twilight Forest dimension. So yeah, they're not even from this. They're not even from this dimension, and the Twilight Forest is a magical dimension. So yeah, these people have always practiced the magic arts, and they've even used that for warfare. The first thing the Twilight Empire ever did after it formed was it conquered the evil Klaskol Empire that kept invading new areas, and the Klaskol Empire was a dictatorship. So a war hero named Zakrem invaded the Klaskol Empire and took it over. They had help from Kenaya, and they believed that they specifically had help from the Kenayan deities, so the Twilight Empire became Kenayist. They made their own form of Kenayism that was mixed with their magical practices, and they worshipped the Kenayan dogs. Now, I'm not going to give you a whole history of the Twilight Empire, just enough so that you can understand the story of Kaulia. So, they had a long, prosperous reign for hundreds of years, but eventually the Distan Empire formed and conquered the Twilight Empire. So the Twilight people lost their identity, and ever since then, there's been a need to create sort of like a new Twilight state, or at least something similar. But yeah, for now, Twilight has completely lost its identity, and the jungle natives are now under the rule of Distan. Eventually, long time later, the Green Plateau took over basically the whole world, and the jungle territory never became a province. It was just called the Jungle Reserve. The reason I did this was because I wanted the jungle to be protected, so the Twilight people lived peacefully under the Jungle Reserve, since nobody was building there. But that changed when the Green Plateau fell, and this Jungle Reserve was divided up amongst these four nations. Now, these nations did not respect the Twilight people, except for this one. The Navaket Empire was a lot better in terms of how they treated the Twilight people than the other countries. In fact, when they discovered a really good diamond mine in the jungle territory, they discovered a diamond mine right here. They basically let the natives run it, and the natives named it Kaulia, which is the native Twilight word for diamonds. So yeah, that's how the city of Kaulia formed, and that's why they built it on those. That's why they built it on those stilts, because they didn't want to cut down any of the trees. So yeah, the Navaket Empire respected the wishes of the Twilight people more than the other countries. So, and that's interesting because the Navaket Empire was descended from Distan, so Distan is the reason that the Twilight Empire fell, but Navaket, which is descended from Distan, is the reason that Kaulia was able to rise. So that's why they have a love-hate relationship with, like, the Distant/Navakeshan people. So eventually, when the Navaka Empire started falling apart after all of these regions left, Kaulia stayed loyal, but they knew that it was all going to fall apart, so they let Kaulia and the surrounding territory become its own country. So that's how the country of Kaulia first formed. Now, in the beginning, they had like zero national identity. They were just like a state that was formed by accident, and most of them just kept living their life. The Kaulian language was really just like a mixture of Distant and Twilight, because the Twilight people tried to learn Distant when they were under the Navakeshan Empire, but they didn't do well. So yeah, it's basically a mixture. But yeah, overall they had no national identity or patriotism until the Great Durlani War. It started when Durlan stole the International Trading Center from Kaulia, and Kaulia just did nothing about it because, they knew they would never be able to take Durlan in a fight. But then, Durlan kept invading Kaulia, as well as invading all these other countries, and Kaulia decided they needed to defend their homeland. So they actually fought really hard. In the end, they lost. But all the other peoples living in the jungle territories in other countries, they saw how hard these jungle natives fought to defend their land, and they realized, this is the opportunity we've been waiting for. This is a jungle country that can become like the new Twilight. So they all migrated to Kaulia, and then they helped liberate Kaulia from Durlan. So eventually, with the help of some other countries like Genesis and Iapeta, Kaulia liberated itself and then joined Iapeta's coalition of all these nations. They tackled Durlan, and Kaulia got a generous portion of land. And the native Sputians, who were living in this part of Durlan, they hated Durlan, so they teamed up with Kaulia. The Sputians and the Kaulians teamed up to fight Durlan, and yeah, that's how they got all this territory. So, the new territory, the non-jungle territory, they built the city of Zwisto there. And the city of Zwisto, it's so sad, it's such a tragedy, because it was originally intended as like a collaboration between the Kaulians and the Sputians. It was meant to promote racial harmony. So yeah, they made the separate autonomous, semi-autonomous princedom of Zwisto or whatever. They had a queen. Their queen was Queen Shalia. She was a Kaulian queen who was a war hero during the Great Durlan War. There was also another war hero named Makbete. He was a Sputian. He was a sheep. And both of them worked alongside each other in the war. But eventually, Makbete started wondering, especially because some other sheep planted this idea in his head. He said, hey, I'm just as much of a war hero as Queen Shalia was, but she's in charge and I'm not. And his fellow sheep friends convinced him it was because the Kaulians were racist against him and his fellow sheep. Now, that wasn't true at the time, but it was about to become true because of what he did. So, basically what he did was he assassinated Queen Shalia, and he declared himself the king, and he imprisoned all the Kaulian non-sheep. And of course that did not last more than like a few days. One of the high-ranking officials, who was indeed racist against sheep, he saw what was going on, he fled, he got Kaulian reinforcements, and ever since then, the entire country of Kaulia has been segregated. So, I actually made a video, a documentary about this a few years ago. It's in the description, so yeah, it's called The Tragedy of Makbete. Makbete is this guy who kind of ruined all the racial harmony that they had. So yeah, you can check that out if you want. Anyway, some top notable sites include, of course, the city of Kaulia. This is like the third picture I've had of it in this video. There's the International Trade Center, a lot of really colorful buildings here. There are some jungle temples, but you can find them in any Minecraft world, so those are not that interesting. There's, of course, a lot of different things to see in Zwisto. There are these floating farms, like on the lake. There's this cave, there's this fountain. There's the Shrine of Zakrem. Zakrem was that Twilight warrior who conquered Klas Kol. We're going to talk about him in the next episode, which is the Klas Kol episode. There's this temple that has booby traps protecting a lot of treasure. I actually went there and I took some of the treasure. There's the Temple of Sacrifice. Now, this is the controversial part. Okay, I'll just tell you. So basically, what they used to do is they would have mothers literally sell their children to this temple to be sacrificed, and they would use the experience to make enchantments. Now they don't sacrifice people, now they just sacrifice prisoners. The reason they stopped doing that is because their neighbors Genesis hated what they were doing, invaded them, and made them stop doing it. And because of this, Kaulia really hates Genesis. Okay, anyway, there's the castle of Zwisto. And yep. So yeah, those are the sites. Now let's talk about their relations with other countries. Now, like I just said, they hate Genesis because they see Genesis as like a bunch of self-righteous colonizers who want to impose their will on Kaulia. But I gotta side with Genesis. It's like, it's not cool to sacrifice your babies for experience. Now, regarding Durlan, they don't really like Durlan, especially because there was that great Durlani War, but they do like this specific part of Durlan, Rajlan. So yeah, they don't love Durlan as a whole, they don't like the Empire, but they do like this little region. Now, Kenaya, they see Kenaya as the country that failed them. Of course, Kenaya was the best friend of, like, the Twilight Empire, but after that, Kenaya sort of failed them, and so Kaulia's given up Kenayism and just kind of had their own sort of mystical beliefs separate from it. Now, they actually kind of do like Jernaya, because even though Jernaya is descended from Distan, who destroyed the Twilight Empire, Jernaya and the Navaket Empire overall is kind of the reason Kaulia is a thing. So yeah, they do kind of like Jernaya. And they also like them because Kaulia is on the side with Ayapeta. They sell Ayapeta a lot of experience. And that's why I say Kaulia is the quiet kid that might kill everyone. Because I'm just wondering, what's Ayapeta doing with all that experience? So yeah, they get along with Jernaya. They also get along with Ayapeta. But their best friends would have to be Man Platin. Kaulia is literally Man Platin's girlfriend. Kaulia loves Man Platin, and there are a lot of ethnic Kaulians who live in Man Platin. It's they just have so much in common. Kaulia's like, hey, your ancestors migrated from a faraway place? So did mine. You oppress your minorities? So do I. You were once part of the Navaket Empire, but you're not, like, distant at all? Hey, so am I. We should go on a date. And Man Platin likes them too. So yeah. So yeah, in conclusion, Kaulia is a beautiful and fascinating country. It just might help them out if they stop performing ritualistic sacrifices and selling the XP to other countries. Stay tuned. Klaus Cole is coming up next.